The last lingering notes of the imperial orchestra hung suspended in the grand ballroom of Schönbrunn Palace. Beneath crystal chandeliers that cast prism light across marble floors, Nadia Petrova stood perfectly still, her white-gloved hands clasped before her. Her sea-green gown, tailored to the latest Viennese fashion of 1898, complemented her dark hair and olive complexion, attributes that marked her as foreign among the predominantly fair Austrians who filled the room. As lady-in-waiting to Archduchess Maria Valeria, Nadia had learned to fade into the gilded woodwork of Habsburg court life. Tonight, however, she felt exposed as Emperor Franz Joseph himself approached their small circle, his famous whiskers neatly trimmed, his military posture unbending despite his advancing years. "Your Majesty," Archduchess Maria Valeria curtsied to her father. "May I present Miss Nadia Petrova, recently arrived from St. Petersburg to join my household." The Emperor's eyes, tired from decades of bearing the weight of an empire, briefly assessed Nadia as she executed a perfect court curtsy. "Russian?" he inquired with formal politeness. "Half Russian, Your Imperial Majesty." "My mother was Austrian," Nadia replied, her accent betraying years of careful education. The Emperor nodded, already moving his attention elsewhere, but Nadia felt another gaze upon her, steady and penetrating. From his position at the ballroom's periphery stood a member of the Imperial Leibgarde, the elite guard corps. Unlike the other guards whose eyes remained fixed forward, this one's attention had clearly been caught. Even in perfect stillness, he exuded a quiet intensity. The gold braid of his dress uniform accentuated broad shoulders, and beneath his plumed helmet, she glimpsed a face that combined martial discipline with unexpected sensitivity. The Archduchess followed Nadia's gaze. "Ah, you've noticed Captain Felix Channing. An unusual appointment, half English, you know. His mother was a Habsburg cousin, and he returned to Austria after military education in England. They say he's brilliant, though perhaps too thoughtful for a soldier. Come, we must greet the Hungarian delegates." As they moved through the crowd, Nadia felt Captain Channing's eyes following her. When she allowed herself one glance back, their gazes locked briefly across the crowded ballroom. His expression remained impassive, befitting his station, yet something in that momentary connection caused her heart to quicken. Felix Channing had not meant to stare. 12 years of military discipline had taught him to maintain the famous Habsburg Guard stillness, the ability to stand for hours, observing everything while appearing to see nothing. Yet something about the dark-haired woman in sea green had drawn his attention from across the vast ballroom. "You'll bore holes through her back if you keep staring, Felix," murmured Lieutenant Keller beside him, his lips barely moving. "I wasn't staring," Felix replied, equally discreet. "Of course not. Just as I wasn't drinking schnapps on duty last week." Felix suppressed a smile. The Russian lady-in-waiting. Half Russian. Her father was some minor aristocrat who fell out of favor with the Tsar. The mother was Austrian, died when the girl was young. There's some mystery about how she secured her position with the Archduchess. They say she speaks 5 languages and plays the piano like an angel. Felix raised an eyebrow. "You're remarkably well informed." Keller's mustache twitched. "My sister serves in the Archduchess's household. She says Miss Petrova is reserved but kind. Unlike some of these court vultures." As the night progressed, Felix found his gaze repeatedly drawn to Nadia Petrova. She moved with a grace that suggested ballet training, and unlike many court ladies who flitted from conversation to conversation, she listened intently to whoever addressed her, her expressions revealing flashes of intelligence and hidden humor. When the ball concluded and the imperial family withdrew, Felix's duties required him to escort several dignitaries to their carriages. The night air carried the first crisp hint of autumn as he stood at the palace entrance, moonlight silvering the gardens beyond. A movement caught his eye, and Nadia Petrova had stepped onto a small side balcony, apparently seeking a moment's solitude. She removed one long white glove and pressed her bare hand to her temple, her posture suggesting exhaustion or perhaps distress. Protocol demanded he remain at his post. Yet something, concern, curiosity, or something less definable, compelled him to speak. "Are you well, Miss Petrova?" he called softly, his voice carrying just far enough. She startled, turning to locate the source of the question. When she spotted him, her composure quickly returned. "Quite well, Captain. Thank you for your concern. The first imperial ball can be overwhelming." A small, genuine smile touched her lips. "Is it that obvious I'm unaccustomed to such grandeur?" "Not at all. You carried yourself with perfect dignity." "But I observed," he stopped, realizing his admission might seem improper. "You observed me," she finished, her tone unreadable. "Forgive me. It's a professional habit to watch for anything unusual." "And am I unusual, Captain Channing?" There was a hint of challenge in her voice. Before he could formulate a response, the Archduchess's voice called from within. "Nadia? Where have you gone?" "I must return," she said, quickly replacing her glove. "Good night, Captain." "Good night, Miss Petrov." He bowed slightly, watching as she disappeared through the balcony doors. Only after she had gone did Felix realize he had stepped away from his assigned position, a minor breach of protocol he had never before committed in 12 years of service. 3 weeks passed before Nadia encountered Captain Channing again. Autumn had fully embraced Vienna, painting the Schönbrunn gardens in russet and gold. The Archduchess had dispatched Nadia to deliver correspondence to the Imperial Library, a task that required crossing the palace's west wing. As she rounded a corner, her arms full of books and papers, she nearly collided with a tall figure in the midnight blue uniform of the Leibgarde. "Miss Petrov," Felix said, quickly stepping aside. "Forgive me. The fault is mine, Captain. I was hurrying and not minding my path." Several papers slipped from her grasp, scattering across the marble floor. They both knelt simultaneously to retrieve them, their hands briefly touching over a sheet of music. The contact, though fleeting, sent an unexpected warmth through Nadia's fingers. "Chopin's Nocturnes," Felix observed, glancing at the sheet before returning it. "Do you play?" "When permitted. Music was a required accomplishment in St. Petersburg, though I fear I bring more enthusiasm than talent to the keyboard." "I doubt that," he said, his tone suggesting he'd formed a different assessment. Standing again, Nadia found herself noticing details about the captain that had escaped her at the ball, the precise way he kept his uniform, a small scar at his temple partially hidden by dark hair, the way his eyes shifted color from gray to blue depending on the light. "Are you heading to the Imperial Library?" he asked. "Yes." The Archduchess requested references on Hungarian constitutional history. "May I escort you?" "I'm currently off duty, and the library can be difficult to navigate." Protocol suggested she decline. Court ladies rarely walked unaccompanied with military officers, even in the relative safety of palace corridors. Yet something in his manner, respectful but eager, made her nod. "Thank you, Captain. I would welcome guidance." As they walked, Felix maintained a proper distance, his hands clasped behind his back. "Have you adjusted to life at Schönbrunn?" he asked. "Mostly. Though I confess, the complexity of Habsburg court etiquette sometimes bewilders me. In Russia, the formality was different, more absolute in some ways, but simpler to navigate." "The empire runs on protocol," Felix agreed. 17 nationalities held together by ceremony and Franz Joseph's sheer force of will. His candid assessment surprised her. Most court officials spoke of the empire in reverent, unquestioning tones. "You speak as though you stand both within and without," Nadia observed. A thoughtful expression crossed his face. "Perhaps I do. My father raised me on English pragmatism, my mother on Habsburg loyalty. It offers perspective, though not always comfortable perspective." They reached the library's massive doors. Felix paused, seeming reluctant to end their conversation. "The Archduchess enjoys music in her private salon on Thursday evenings," Nadia said suddenly. "Perhaps you might attend, if your duties permit. I believe I'm to play something from these very nocturnes." His eyes brightened. "I would be honored, though I'm rarely invited to such intimate gatherings. The Archduchess values talented company more than rank. I could mention your interest in classical music. Do you make such offers to all the palace guards, Miss Petrov?" There was gentle teasing in his voice. As he bowed and took his leave, Nadia felt a flutter of anticipation. Only after entering the library did she realize how improper her invitation might seem. What had possessed her to extend such familiarity to a man she barely knew? Yet as she collected the historical references, her thoughts kept returning to the captain's perceptive eyes and the brief touch of his hand over sheet music. Felix stood at attention in the Archduchess's antechamber, feeling distinctly out of place. Though his position in the Leibgarde granted him access to most palace spaces, the intimate musical gatherings of royal ladies were well outside his usual domain. He had been astonished to receive the invitation, a small card bearing the Archduchess's seal, requesting his presence for an evening of musical appreciation. He wondered if Miss Petrov had truly mentioned him, or if some other circumstance had prompted the unexpected honor. The doors to the salon opened, and a chamberlain announced him with formal precision. The Archduchess Maria Valeria sat among a small gathering of ladies and selected courtiers, her kind face brightening upon his entrance. "Captain Channing, welcome," she said, extending her hand. "Miss Petrov mentions you appreciate Chopin. We are fortunate to have several accomplished musicians among us tonight." Felix bowed over her hand, acutely aware of Nadia Petrov sitting quietly near the pianoforte, her eyes downcast in a display of perfect modesty. Tonight she wore a simple gown of deep blue, adorned only with a single strand of pearls. "Your Imperial Highness honors me with this invitation," he replied. The evening progressed through several musical performances, a violinist from the court orchestra, a tenor who sang Schubert with impressive emotion, and a countess whose technical proficiency at the piano was admirable if somewhat lacking in feeling. When Nadia's turn came, she approached the instrument with surprising confidence. Her fingers hovered momentarily above the keys before beginning Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. Felix had heard virtuosos perform this piece at Vienna's grand concert halls, yet something in Nadia's interpretation moved him more deeply. She played with a controlled passion that transformed the salon, her technical execution perhaps not flawless, but her emotional understanding of the music undeniable. When the final notes faded, silence held the room for several heartbeats before applause began. Felix noticed the Archduchess watching Nadia with genuine affection. "Beautifully done, my dear," Maria Valeria said. "Though I still maintain Chopin intended more restraint in the middle passage." "Perhaps, Your Highness," Nadia replied with a small smile. "But I believe he also understood the heart must sometimes overcome restraint." The Archduchess laughed. "Well argued. Captain Channing, what did you think of our Miss Petrov's interpretation?" Put suddenly on the spot, Felix chose honesty. "I thought it revealed the piece's soul, Your Imperial Highness. Technical perfection serves music, but understanding its emotional landscape transforms it." His words earned approving murmurs from several guests, but it was the quick glance from Nadia, surprised and pleased, that warmed him. Later, as refreshments were served, he managed a brief moment near her. "You play beautifully," he said quietly. "You are kind to say so, though I know my limitations." It wasn't kindness, but truth. "You understand Chopin as though you've lived his melancholy." Her eyes met his, suddenly vulnerable. "Perhaps I have, in my way. Music speaks what cannot otherwise be said, especially in places where walls have ears." Before he could respond to this cryptic comment, another guest approached, and the moment passed. Throughout the remainder of the evening, Felix found no further opportunity for private conversation, yet something had shifted between them, a recognition of shared understanding. As the gathering concluded and guests began departing, the Archduchess surprised him again. "Captain Channing, I'm told you have an interest in the Imperial Botanical Collection. Perhaps you might escort Miss Petrov through the Palm House tomorrow? She has expressed curiosity about the tropical specimens, and I can spare her for the afternoon." Both Felix and Nadia carefully controlled their expressions at this unexpected suggestion. "It would be my honor, Your Imperial Highness," Felix replied with a bow. Only later, returning to the officers' quarters, did Felix wonder at the Archduchess's unusual interest in facilitating their acquaintance. Maria Valeria had a reputation for romantic sensibility, but surely she didn't intend to encourage a connection between a palace guard, even one with distant Habsburg blood, and her lady-in-waiting? Whatever her motives, Tomorrow would bring an opportunity Felix had scarcely dared hope for, hours in Nadia Petrov's company, away from the formality of court functions. As he prepared for bed, the nocturne she had played echoed in his memory, along with her enigmatic words, "Music speaks what cannot otherwise be said, especially in places where walls have ears." What secrets, he wondered, did Nadia Petrov carry behind her composed exterior? The imperial palm house stretched like a crystal palace among Schönbrunn formal gardens. Nadia walked beside Captain Channing, Felix, as he had asked her to call him when away from court ceremony, marveling at the engineering that created this tropical oasis in the heart of Austria. Steam-heated air enveloped them in warm humidity, fogging the glass panes above and creating an intimate world of lush greenery. Exotic orchids displayed impossible colors, while towering palms reached toward the curved glass ceiling. The Emperor commissioned this in 1882, Felix explained, his voice low enough that the few other visitors couldn't overhear. He's fascinated by botanical specimens from across the empire and beyond. Some of these plants come from expeditions to Brazil and the South Seas. It's magnificent, Nadia replied, pausing before a vibrant red bloom. In Russia, we had nothing like this. The Winter Palace contained splendors of human creation, but nature was something to be endured, not cultivated. You speak of Russia with complicated feeling, Felix observed. Nadia touched a broad leaf, considering her words carefully. Russia shaped me, though not always kindly. My father's position at court was precarious. After my mother died, we existed in a state of constant anxiety, always one misstep from disaster. Yet you found your way to Vienna. Through circumstances both fortunate and painful. My father arranged my Austrian education before his final fall from favor. She hesitated, then added, the Archduchess's kindness saved me from an uncertain fate. As they moved deeper into the palm house, the pathways narrowed, forcing them to walk closer together. In this tropical microcosm, the rigid formality of Habsburg court life seemed to soften around the edges. And you, Captain, Felix, Nadia said, changing the subject. What circumstances brought you back to your mother's homeland? I understand military service in England offers distinguished opportunities. A shadow crossed his features. My return wasn't entirely by choice. My father died when I was 20, and certain political complications made my position in England untenable. My mother's Habsburg connections offered refuge and purpose. Political complications? Nadia echoed, her curiosity piqued. Felix led her toward a stone bench partially concealed by hanging vines. Once seated, he spoke more freely. My father served in diplomatic intelligence. After his death, papers were discovered suggesting he had shared information with Austria that England preferred to keep secret. Though I knew nothing of his activities, suspicion fell on me as well. Rather than face disgrace or worse, I accepted the Emperor's offer of a commission in the Leibgarde. So we both came to Vienna fleeing shadows, Nadia said softly. Their eyes met, recognition flowing between them, two people shaped by forces beyond their control, finding unexpected connection in a glass-walled garden. What shadows still follow you, Nadia? He asked, the informal address crossing his lips naturally. She glanced around instinctively before answering. Perhaps this isn't the place for such confidences. The rushing water masks conversation, and we're quite alone. He gestured to the ornamental fountain nearby and the empty pathways. But I understand your caution. Court life teaches discretion above all else. Nadia studied him, weighing trust against experience. My father was involved with political reformists in Russia, intellectuals who advocated constitutional monarchy over absolutism. When the crackdown came, he was arrested. I was already studying in Vienna when word reached me of his death in prison. Felix's expression darkened with sympathy. I'm deeply sorry. The official report claimed heart failure, but letters from family friends suggested otherwise. Her voice remained steady, though the pain still lingered. After that, returning to Russia became impossible. The Archduchess, who had known my mother years ago, offered me position and protection. The Archduchess is known for her compassion, but such generosity seems extraordinary. Nadia's fingers twisted nervously in her lap. There was another factor. Before his arrest, is duty truly straightforward for anyone with a conscience? Nadia asked. You stand between the emperor and any threat, but what happens when the threat comes from within, from policies that harm the very people you're sworn to protect? Her question hung between them, dangerous in its implications. Felix studied her face, seeming to measure both her words and the person behind them. You ask questions that many think but few dare voice, he said finally. Forgive me. I've spoken too freely. No, he said, reaching for her hand before catching himself and withdrawing. Your honesty honors me. But we should be careful. Even in this paradise, the empire has ears. As if underlining his point, footsteps approached, a palace gardener appearing around a bend in the path. Felix stood smoothly, resuming his role as proper escort. The medicinal plants from the Americas are quite remarkable, he said in a louder, more formal tone. Shall we continue our tour, Miss Petrov? Nadia rose, understanding his quick shift in manner. Yes, Captain Channing. I would be most interested. As they proceeded through the palm house, maintaining proper distance and conversation, Nadia felt something profound had changed between them. They had shared secrets, revealed vulnerabilities, created a private understanding in the midst of the empire's most public garden. What neither could know was that their conversation had indeed been overheard, not by the gardener, but by a figure who had paused on the path behind the fountain, hidden by tropical foliage and the sound of running water. In the weeks that followed, Felix and Nadia developed a careful dance of proximity and distance. Their official interactions remained perfectly proper, he the dutiful guard captain, she the composed lady-in-waiting. Yet they created opportunities for brief exchanges, passing in palace corridors, chance meetings in the imperial library, moments in the gardens when her duties allowed walking and his rotation permitted movement beyond fixed posts. November brought early snow to Vienna and confined court life more firmly within palace walls. Felix found himself assigned to the imperial family's private wing more frequently, a development that both increased his chances of glimpsing Nadia and raised his concerns about their growing connection. One evening, standing guard outside the emperor's study where a privy council meeting continued late into the night, Felix noticed Nadia approaching with a silver tea service. Captain, she acknowledged formally as she passed. Miss Petrov, he returned with equal propriety. Only when she entered the antechamber did he notice she had somehow slipped a folded note beneath the saucer on her tray. His heartbeat quickened, though his expression remained impassive. 20 minutes later, when she emerged without the tea service, she dropped her handkerchief just beyond his position. As protocol demanded, he retrieved it and returned it to her with a formal bow. Thank you, Captain, she murmured, accepting both handkerchief and the note he had managed to slip beneath it. Later that night, in the privacy of his quarters, Felix unfolded the cream-colored paper and read Nadia's elegant script, tomorrow at 4, the Archduchess visits the Empress. The Chinese pavilion in the garden offers shelter from prying eyes. If your duties permit, I shall be sketching there briefly. Felix stared at the note, conflicted. Such a meeting carried risk, not immediate danger, perhaps, but potential consequences for both their positions. Yet the prospect of speaking freely with Nadia, even briefly, overwhelmed his caution. The following afternoon, a bitter wind swept across Schönbrunns gardens, ensuring few courtiers would venture outside. Felix, having arranged to inspect the outer guard positions, made his way to the Chinese pavilion, an ornate structure of red lacquer and gold leaf that stood empty and somewhat forlorn in the winter landscape. Inside, Nadia sat on a bench with a sketchbook open on her lap, though her pencil remained idle. She looked up as he entered, her cheeks flushed from cold or anticipation. You came, she said simply. Did you doubt I would? Not your willingness, but perhaps your wisdom. A small smile softened her words. Felix removed his gloves and sat beside her, close enough for conversation but maintaining a respectful distance. Wisdom often loses when competing with stronger motivations. And what motivations overrode your wisdom, Captain? There was a teasing quality to her voice that he had come to treasure. The desire for honest conversation, he replied, though both knew it was only part of the truth. We speak in fragments and coded phrases. I find myself collecting them like puzzle pieces, trying to form a complete picture. Of what? She asked. Of you. Of what exists between us. Of whether I imagine the connection I feel. Nadia's expression grew serious. You don't imagine it. She closed her sketchbook. I've never spoken so freely with anyone at court as I do with you. Perhaps because you understand existing between worlds. Is that where we exist? Between worlds? Where else could we exist? A trace of sadness entered her voice. You are sworn to the Emperor's service. I live by the Archduchess's grace. Our duties define our boundaries. Felix considered her words. Duty without conscience is merely obedience. My father taught me that before I understood its meaning. Now I wonder if he was preparing me for choices he foresaw. What choices do you contemplate? Her question came softly, almost fearfully. Instead of answering directly, Felix reached for her hand, his thumb tracing gently over her knuckles. The simple contact sent warmth through him despite the pavilion's chill. I think about alternatives, he said finally. About paths not defined by palace walls and centuries of Habsburg tradition. I wonder if the Empire's twilight offers possibilities its daylight never permitted. Nadia's fingers tightened around his. Such thoughts court danger. Less danger than continuing without acknowledging what grows between us. For a moment, they sat in silence, hands joined, the gravity of unspoken feelings filling the space between them. I should return before my absence is noted, Nadia said eventually, though she made no move to withdraw her hand. When can we speak again? Felix asked. The Empress hosts the Christmas concert in 2 weeks. The Archduchess has requested I perform. Will you attend? In official capacity, yes. The Leibgarde provides security for all imperial appearances. Nadia smiled ruefully. So you'll be watching the crowd while I play. I'll hear every note, he promised, finally releasing her hand. And afterward, the pavilion door creaked suddenly, and they separated with practiced swiftness. Felix stood as Lieutenant Keller entered, his expression carefully neutral. Captain, you're needed at the west gate. A situation with the perimeter guards. Felix nodded crisply. Miss Petrov was kind enough to share her observations on Chinese architecture. Most illuminating. Indeed, Keller replied, his eyes revealing nothing of his thoughts. Miss Petrov. Nadia gathered her sketching materials, her composure perfect. Gentlemen, the cold grows uncomfortable for drawing. I shall return to the palace. As she departed ahead of them, Felix caught Keller's questioning glance. It was an accidental meeting, Felix said quietly. Nothing improper. I would never suggest otherwise, Keller replied. But others might, if they observed what I did. Be careful, Felix. The walls have eyes as well as ears. The warning echoed in Felix's mind as they walked back toward the palace. Had he allowed his growing feelings for Nadia to blind him to the surveillance that permeated imperial court life? And what of Keller himself, friend and comrade, but also a man bound by the same oaths of service? The Christmas concert would bring opportunities and risks in equal measure. Until then, Felix knew they must exercise even greater caution. Yet as he resumed his duties, the memory of Nadia's hand in his provided a warmth that the December chill couldn't touch. The imperial chapel glowed with hundreds of candles, their light reflecting off gold leaf and polished marble. Nadia sat at the grand piano, acutely aware of Emperor Franz Joseph and the extended Habsburg family in the front pews. Her fingers trembled slightly as she prepared to perform the Bach prelude the Empress herself had requested. From her position, she could see Felix standing with the Leibgarde near the chapel's main entrance. Though his eye scanned the assembled dignitaries as duty required, she felt certain he was acutely aware of her presence. The Archduchess Maria Valeria caught her eye and nodded encouragingly. Nadia took a deep breath and began to play, letting Bach's mathematical precision calm her nerves. As the music filled the sacred space, she allowed herself one glance toward Felix. Though his posture remained rigid with formal duty, a hint of pride showed in his eyes as they briefly met hers. The piece concluded to appreciative applause, and Nadia rose to curtsy deeply to the imperial family. As she took her seat beside the other performers, relief washed through her. Only the reception remained before she could retreat from such intense scrutiny. Later, amid the controlled opulence of the reception, Nadia circulated as protocol demanded. She exchanged pleasantries with ambassadors and aristocrats, accepting compliments on her performance with practiced modesty. "You played magnificently," said a voice behind her. She turned to find Lieutenant Keller, wine glass in hand, his expression cordial. "You're too kind, Lieutenant," she replied cautiously, unsure of his intention since interrupting her meeting with Felix at the pavilion. "Not at all. I've developed an appreciation for Bach since joining the Leibgarde. Captain Channing often plays recordings in the officers' quarters." He sipped his wine. "He speaks highly of your musical interpretations." Nadia maintained her composure, though her heart quickened at this oblique reference to Felix's interest. "The captain is generous in his assessment. I understand he has extensive musical knowledge." Among other qualities, Keller agreed, his tone shifting slightly. "His loyalty, for instance, is beyond question. Those of us who serve alongside him would do anything to prevent harm coming to his reputation or position." The warning was clear, despite its careful delivery. Nadia met his gaze directly. Such loyalty speaks well of both the captain and those who value him. Keller nodded, apparently satisfied with her response. "Indeed. Ah, I believe the Archduchess is looking for you." Nadia glanced across the room to where Maria Valeria stood conversing with a white-haired gentleman whose elaborate uniform suggested high diplomatic rank. The Archduchess beckoned subtly. "If you'll excuse me, Lieutenant," Nadia said with a polite nod. As she crossed the room, Nadia noticed Felix had been repositioned near the Archduchess's circle. He stood at perfect attention, though she sensed his awareness of her approach. "Nadia, come meet Count Radetzky," the Archduchess said warmly. "The Count is most impressed with your performance." "Your talent honors the Empire, Miss Petrov," the elderly diplomat said, bowing slightly. "The Archduchess tells me you may accompany her to Budapest for the spring diplomatic reception. I hope you'll consent to perform there as well." "I serve at Her Imperial Highness's pleasure," Nadia replied diplomatically, though this was the first she'd heard of such a journey. "Excellent. The Hungarian nobles appreciate fine music, though perhaps not as much as they appreciate a beautiful performer." The Count's gallantry carried a hint of condescension that Nadia had learned to ignore from men of his generation. As the conversation continued, Nadia became aware of a subtle tension emanating from Felix. Though his expression remained properly impassive, something in his stance suggested concern. Eventually, the Count moved on to greet other guests, and the Archduchess drew Nadia slightly aside, speaking in lowered tones. "I haven't yet mentioned Budapest because the arrangements were only confirmed yesterday. We leave in 3 weeks' time for a diplomatic visit of great significance. The Hungarian situation grows more delicate, and the Emperor believes cultural exchanges may soothe nationalist sentiments." "Of course, Your Imperial Highness. I shall prepare appropriately." Maria Valeria studied her thoughtfully. "The visit may present certain opportunities regarding those documents we've discussed. Several individuals interested in their contents will be present." Nadia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter night. "I understand. Captain Channing will accompany our delegation as security liaison," the Archduchess added, with a knowing glance that made Nadia wonder exactly how much Maria Valeria had observed of their interactions. "As you wish, Your Highness." The Archduchess smiled gently. "Sometimes wishes align with duty, dear Nadia. A rare blessing when they do." With that cryptic comment, she moved away to attend to other guests. Nadia remained where she stood, processing this unexpected development. Budapest would mean 3 weeks away from Schönbrunn's constant surveillance, perhaps opportunities for less guarded conversation with Felix. Yet the Archduchess's reference to the Russian document suggested the journey carried its own dangers. As the reception continued around her, Nadia felt the weight of multiple expectations pressing upon her. The Archduchess, whose kindness had saved her from destitution, clearly had plans for both her and the sensitive information she guarded. And Felix, what of her growing feelings for him? How could such feelings possibly find expression within the rigid hierarchies that governed their lives? As if summoned by her thoughts, Felix appeared at her side, maintaining proper distance while performing his official function of checking on each member of the imperial household. "Is everything satisfactory, Miss Petrov?" he asked formally. "Quite satisfactory, Captain, thank you." Then, barely audible, "Budapest." His eyes revealed a flash of understanding before he nodded and continued his rounds. That single word contained volumes: a city away from Vienna's suffocating protocol, a possibility of freer association, perhaps even a chance to determine what future, if any, might exist for feelings that had grown too powerful to dismiss as mere friendship. But as Nadia watched Felix resume his duties, she wondered if Budapest represented opportunity or merely a different kind of confinement. The documents hidden in her possession cast a long shadow, one that stretched across borders and perhaps beyond her ability to control. Snow blanketed the Hungarian countryside as the imperial train carried the Archduchess's delegation toward Budapest. Nadia sat in a private compartment with Maria Valeria, watching crystalline landscapes pass beyond frost-edged windows. "The Hungarians will make much of this visit," the Archduchess said, setting aside diplomatic briefs. "They consider themselves equal partners in the empire, though many seek greater autonomy. Is reconciliation truly possible?" Nadia asked. Maria Valeria sighed. "My father has spent his reign balancing competing nationalisms. The 1867 compromise gave Hungary constitutional equality, but satisfied neither Hungarian nationalists nor Austrian centralists. Now we perform this elaborate dance of symbolic gestures and cultural exchanges while the foundations slowly shift beneath us." Such candid political assessment surprised Nadia. The Archduchess rarely spoke so openly about the empire's challenges. "You look startled, my dear," Maria Valeria observed with a small smile. "Did you think I was unaware of our predicament? I am a Habsburg. We are raised to understand the fragility of what appears most solid. Your Imperial Highness is most perceptive. As are you, Nadia. Your position has granted you unique perspective on both Russian and Habsburg governance. Tell me, which system seems more likely to weather the coming century?" The question felt like a test. Nadia chose her words carefully. Both empires rest on foundations built in different eras. Russia's absolutism creates stability through fear, while Austria-Hungary's complex compromises create stability through negotiation. Perhaps neither approach fully addresses the demands of modern nationalism. Diplomatically expressed, the Archduchess nodded approvingly. "And what of those documents you safeguard? Do they suggest alternatives?" "They reveal corruption and abuse within the Russian system, Your Highness. But they also contain correspondence about constitutional reforms that might have prevented revolution, reforms that Tsar rejected, costing many lives including my father's." Maria Valeria studied her with unexpected intensity. "And if similar choices faced our empire? Where would your loyalty lie?" "My loyalty is to your Imperial Highness," Nadia replied without hesitation. "You saved me when I had nowhere to turn." A gracious answer, but not quite what I asked. The Archduchess's tone remained gentle. "We approach a time when personal loyalties may conflict with broader principles. The empire that sheltered us may require transformation to survive at all." Before Nadia could process this remarkable statement, a knock at the compartment door interrupted them. A steward announced Captain Channing's request to provide a security briefing. Felix entered, resplendent in his dress uniform, and bowed formally. "Your Imperial Highness, Miss Petrov." "Captain Channing," the Archduchess acknowledged. "Your security assessment." "All is in order, Your Highness. We will arrive at Budapest's Western Station in approximately 1 hour. Hungarian honor guards will escort us to Buda Castle, where state apartments have been prepared. I've taken the liberty of reviewing all arrangements personally." "Excellent. And what of Count Esterhazy's request for a private audience?" "Scheduled for tomorrow morning, with appropriate security measures in place." The Archduchess nodded, seemingly satisfied. Very good. Nadia described her earlier conversation with Maria Valeria. She spoke of the empire requiring transformation. It was almost as if she tests your receptiveness to reform, Felix finished thoughtfully. Interesting. The Archduchess has always been considered politically conservative, devoted to her father's vision of the empire. Perhaps appearances and reality differ, Nadia suggested. Much like our own careful performances at court. Felix glanced around, confirming they were alone save for an elderly couple dozing at the far end of the car. He moved slightly closer, his voice dropping further. I've received unusual orders for this journey. Rather than remaining constantly with the Archduchess's party, I'm instructed to liaise with certain Hungarian officials, ostensibly for security coordination, but with additional directives to assess their political leanings. You're being asked to gather intelligence, Nadia concluded. So it seems. Intelligence that would normally fall to diplomatic staff, not the Leibgarde. They stood silently for a moment, watching Hungary unfold before them, a kingdom joined to Austria by political necessity rather than natural affinity. Budapest will place us in unfamiliar currents, Nadia said finally. We should proceed with caution. Felix's hand moved slightly, his fingers brushing against hers for the briefest moment. And yet, I cannot regret whatever designs have brought us here together. The simple contact sent warmth coursing through Nadia despite her concern. Nor can I, she admitted. Though I fear what may be expected of us both. We'll navigate carefully, he promised. One step at a time. As Budapest's magnificent parliament building came into view, its neo-Gothic spires rising impressively along the Danube, Nadia felt both apprehension and anticipation. Whatever political machinations surrounded them, this journey had created space for their connection to develop beyond Schönbrunn's constraining walls. The elderly couple stirred, preparing to disembark, and Felix smoothly increased the distance between himself and Nadia, resuming his official bearing. The Hungarian parliament was completed just 5 years ago, he explained in a normal tone. A statement of Magyar identity within the dual monarchy framework. It's magnificent, Nadia replied, easily matching his shift to conventional conversation. As the train approached the station, Felix offered her his arm with formal correctness. We should return to prepare for arrival, Miss Petrov. She accepted with equal propriety, yet the brief pressure of his arm against hers conveyed understanding beyond words. Together they walked back through the imperial train, outwardly the perfect picture of a guard captain escorting a lady-in-waiting, inwardly connected by growing feelings and shared awareness of the complicated waters they had begun to navigate. Behind them, Budapest rose from the winter landscape like a fairy tale city, beautiful and deceptive, much like the political currents that had brought them to its gates. Buda Castle perched majestically above the Danube, its cream-colored walls gleaming against the winter sky. For centuries it had housed Hungarian kings, Ottoman pashas, Habsburg governors, and now the ceremonial residence of Emperor Franz Joseph as King of Hungary, a dual role that epitomized the compromise holding the empire together. 3 days into their visit, Nadia had scarcely seen Felix except during formal functions where they maintained professional distance. The Archduchess kept a demanding schedule of diplomatic meetings, concerts, and receptions that required Nadia's constant attendance, while Felix had been occupied with his mysterious security consultations. On the 4th evening, following a particularly lavish dinner with Hungarian nobility, Nadia returned to her chambers exhausted. The apartments assigned to the Archduchess's household were sumptuous but maintained the rigid hierarchies of court life. Nadia's rooms, while comfortable, were situated in a wing separate from the main royal chambers. As she prepared for bed, a soft knock startled her. Opening the door cautiously, she found a Hungarian maid holding a silver tray with a folded note. "For you, miss," the maid said in halting German, bobbing a quick curtsy before departing. Nadia closed the door and unfolded the paper with curious fingers. The handwriting was instantly recognizable. The castle gardens contain a small pavilion near the southern wall. Hungarian guards change rotation at 11 p.m., leaving a 20-minute gap in surveillance. If you can manage it safely, I'll wait there tonight. Her heart quickened. Such a meeting carried significant risk, particularly in unfamiliar surroundings where they couldn't be certain who might observe them. Yet the prospect of speaking freely with Felix after days of formal separation proved irresistible. At precisely 10:50 p.m., Nadia slipped from her room wearing a dark cloak over her evening dress. She had paid careful attention to the castle's layout during their arrival tour and now moved confidently through the less-traveled corridors, avoiding the main halls where late-night diplomatic discussions might still be underway. The night air bit cold against her face as she stepped into the gardens. Snow crunched beneath her boots while moonlight cast blue-silver illumination across formal hedges and statuary. She kept to the shadows, making her way toward the southern wall where a small stone pavilion stood partially concealed by dormant rose arbors. Felix waited inside, a dark figure against pale stone. He wore civilian clothes rather than his uniform, a strategic choice that might allow him to claim he was simply enjoying the night air if discovered. "You came," he said softly as she entered, his voice warm with relief and something deeper. "Did you doubt I would?" She echoed his words from their meeting at Schönbrunn. "I know the risks you take." He stepped closer, taking her gloved hands in his. "Thank you for taking them." In the intimate space of the pavilion, with Budapest's lights twinkling beyond the castle walls, the careful distance they had maintained seemed suddenly arbitrary. Nadia felt the subtle shift as Felix's hands tightened around hers. "I've missed our conversations," she said, trying to maintain composure despite the quickening of her pulse. "Is it only conversation you've missed?" His question hung between them, bolder than any he had previously ventured. Rather than answer with words, Nadia moved closer, tilting her face upward. Felix hesitated only a moment before lowering his lips to hers in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened with weeks of restrained emotion. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Felix kept her close within the circle of his arms. "I've imagined that moment since the night you played Chopin," he admitted. "As have I," she confessed. "Though I told myself such thoughts were impossible folly." "And now?" His eyes searched hers in the dim light. "Now I know their dangerous reality," she replied. "But I cannot bring myself to regret them." The honesty between them created its own momentum. There in the moonlit pavilion, they spoke without the coded language and careful evasions that had characterized their previous exchanges. Felix described his mysterious meetings with Hungarian military officials who spoke openly of constitutional reforms and greater autonomy. Nadia shared her growing conviction that the Archduchess was using their visit to advance political agendas not fully aligned with the Emperor's conservative stance. "She's positioning herself carefully," Nadia explained. "Yesterday she met privately with liberal Hungarian intellectuals, the very sort the Emperor considers dangerous agitators. Yet officially, we attend only cultural events and charitable functions." "And your Russian documents?" Felix asked. "Have they been mentioned?" "Not directly. But Count Esterhazy inquired about my father's political associations in St. Petersburg." The question seemed innocuous, but his eyes told a different story. Felix frowned. "The pieces don't quite align. Why would Hungarian reformists care about Russian political documents? Perhaps they seek patterns, successful strategies for constitutional reform that might apply to their own situation. Or perhaps," Felix stopped suddenly, his body tensing as he tilted his head to listen. Footsteps crunched on snow-covered gravel, approaching the pavilion. Felix moved with practiced efficiency, pulling Nadia behind a decorative column just as a beam of light swept across the pavilion's entrance. "Check all garden structures," came a voice in Hungarian accented German. "The captain insists on complete perimeter verification." "At this hour?" "In this cold," grumbled another voice. "Orders from Vienna." Something about increased security concerns. The beam of light penetrated deeper into the pavilion, sweeping dangerously close to their hiding place. Felix pressed Nadia against the wall, his body shielding hers from the light's reach. She held her breath, acutely aware of his heart beating rapidly against her own. After an eternity compressed into seconds, the guards moved on, their grumbling voices fading into the night. "Orders from Vienna," Felix whispered once silence had returned. "I received no such communication." Which means either you're being deliberately excluded, or someone knows we're meeting, he finished grimly. The magical With a final lingering look, she slipped from the pavilion and back into the shadowed gardens, her mind racing with both the wonder of their shared moment and the growing sense that larger forces were converging around them, forces that might prove indifferent to the heart's desires. The following days brought a whirlwind of activity as the Archduchess's visit reached its diplomatic crescendo. Nadia found herself constantly at Maria Valeria's side, attending meetings, concerts, and formal receptions where Hungarian nobility mingled uneasily with Habsburg officials. Through it all, she caught only glimpses of Felix, their interaction limited to formal nods and carefully neutral exchanges. On their 6th night in Budapest, the Hungarian parliament hosted a grand gala celebrating cultural cooperation between the dual monarchies. The magnificent building blazed with electric lights, its Gothic Revival architecture providing a spectacular backdrop for assembled dignitaries in their finest attire. Nadia wore a gown of deep burgundy silk, selected by the Archduchess herself from the finest Budapest modiste. As she helped Maria Valeria with final preparations in the Parliament's royal receiving room, the Archduchess seemed unusually contemplative. "You've served me with exceptional loyalty, Nadia," she said suddenly, studying her reflection as Nadia adjusted a diamond tiara. "I hope you know how much I value your discretion. Your Imperial Highness honors me with her trust." Maria Valeria met Nadia's eyes in the mirror. "Tonight may present unexpected developments. Whatever happens, remember that appearances often diverge from underlying purpose." Before Nadia could request clarification of this cryptic statement, a chamberlain announced it was time to join the festivities. The Parliament's grand staircase provided a dramatic entrance for the Archduchess's party. As they descended, Nadia spotted Felix positioned at the base of the stairs, resplendent in full dress uniform. Their eyes met briefly, his expression professionally neutral despite the intensity she felt in his gaze. The evening progressed through elaborate protocol, speeches celebrating Austro-Hungarian unity, musical performances blending Viennese and Magyar traditions, toasts to continued prosperity under the dual crown. Throughout these formalities, Nadia sensed currents of tension beneath the polished surface. Hungarian nobles spoke with exaggerated deference that barely masked nationalist pride, while Habsburg officials responded with condescension thinly veiled as benevolence. During a momentary respite while the Archduchess conversed with senior Hungarian ministers, Count Esterházy approached Nadia with practiced charm. "Miss Petrov, you enhance our humble gathering with your presence," he said, bowing over her hand. "I understand you've brought certain historical documents of interest with you to Budapest." Nadia maintained perfect composure despite her inner alarm. "I'm afraid I don't understand your reference, Count." "No?" "Perhaps I misunderstood the Archduchess." His smile remained fixed, but his eyes hardened slightly. "She indicated you might share insights on constitutional arrangements that proved unsuccessful in Russia. Academic interest only, you understand." "Her Imperial Highness sometimes overestimates my knowledge of such matters," Nadia replied carefully. "Indeed? How disappointing." He glanced across the room to where Felix stood at attention near a side entrance. "Your Captain Channing seems most attentive to your movements tonight. He attends to the entire delegation's security, Count." "It's his duty." "Of course." Esterházy's smile took on a knowing quality that chilled Nadia. "Though duty sometimes proves flexible when competing with stronger motivations, doesn't it?" Before she could respond to this thinly veiled insinuation, a commotion near the main entrance drew everyone's attention. A messenger in imperial livery had arrived, moving urgently toward the Archduchess with dispatches bearing the Emperor's seal. Maria Valeria received the documents with visible concern, withdrawing to a side chamber to review them. When she emerged minutes later, her expression was grave. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice carrying authority that silenced the gathering, "I've received urgent news from Vienna. His Imperial Majesty requires my immediate return to address matters of state importance. We shall depart for Vienna by special train within the hour." Murmurs of surprise and speculation rippled through the assembly. Such an abrupt departure violated every protocol of diplomatic courtesy. Whatever had prompted it must be significant indeed. Amidst the controlled chaos that followed, apologetic farewells, hasty preparations, arrangements for transport to the station, Nadia found herself momentarily alone in an antechamber, gathering the Archduchess's personal items. A hand touched her elbow, and she turned to find Felix, his expression tense. "Something's wrong," he said without preamble. "This recall isn't what it appears." "What do you mean?" "I've received no security alerts from Vienna, nothing that would warrant emergency return. And the messenger who delivered the Emperor's dispatches is unknown to me." Nadia's concern deepened. The Archduchess seemed genuinely alarmed by the contents. "Or perfectly performing alarm," Felix countered. "Remember what she told you, appearances often diverge from underlying purpose." Before they could continue, Lieutenant Keller appeared at the doorway. "Captain, we must secure the route to the station immediately. And Miss Petrov, the Archduchess requests your presence." As they parted, Felix's hand brushed against hers in a gesture too deliberate to be accidental. She felt something pressed into her palm, a small key. "West Wing, 3rd floor, room 317, he whispered, his lips barely moving. "If we're separated, trust no one else." The cryptic message and mysterious key left Nadia deeply unsettled as she hurried to attend the Archduchess. What had Felix discovered? And why would he anticipate their separation? As the delegation rushed toward waiting carriages, Nadia noticed Hungarian police mixing with Habsburg guards, their presence supposedly ensuring safe passage to the station. Yet their watchful eyes seemed focused less on external threats and more on the Archduchess's party itself, particularly on Nadia. The night that had begun with diplomatic ceremony was ending in mysterious urgency, with danger lurking beneath the surface of official explanation. As their carriage pulled away from the Parliament building, Nadia clutched Felix's key tightly in her hand, wondering what door it might unlock, and what waited on the other side. The special train raced through the Hungarian night, its urgent rhythm matching Nadia's quickened pulse. In the private imperial carriage, the Archduchess sat with uncharacteristic rigidity, her earlier explanation about urgent matters of state remaining deliberately vague despite Nadia's careful inquiries. Most concerning was Felix's absence. When the train departed Budapest, he was nowhere to be seen among the Leibgarde contingent. Lieutenant Keller had merely stated that Captain Channing remains in Budapest on special assignment when Nadia discreetly inquired. The key Felix had pressed into her hand now hung on a thin chain beneath her high-necked traveling dress, its weight a constant reminder of unresolved questions. As the Hungarian plains gave way to Austrian territory near dawn, Maria Valeria finally addressed Nadia directly, dismissing her other attendants with a wave. "I believe it's time we speak plainly, Nadia," she said once they were alone. "The documents your father entrusted to you, you've kept them secure all this time." "Yes, Your Imperial Highness," Nadia replied cautiously. "As you instructed." "Good. Their contents have become unexpectedly significant. There are forces both within and outside the Empire who would use them for purposes contrary to Habsburg interests." "May I ask what has changed?" "These documents have been in my possession for years." The Archduchess studied her with surprising intensity. Recent developments in Russia suggest another push for constitutional reform, one potentially more successful than your father's generation attempted. Emperor Nicholas feels his authority threatened and seeks allies among fellow monarchs. Meanwhile, Hungarian nationalists see opportunity in Russian constitutional examples. "And where does Captain Channing fit into this situation?" Nadia asked, unable to contain the question foremost in her mind. Something like sympathy flickered in Maria Valeria's eyes. "Ah. So it's progressed that far between you." Nadia felt heat rise to her face but maintained composure. "I'm merely concerned for a loyal officer of the Leibgarde." "Of course." The Archduchess's tone suggested she understood far more than Nadia had admitted. "Captain Channing remains in Budapest to monitor certain Hungarian officials whose loyalty has come into question. His partial English heritage provides useful distance if complications arise." "What complications do you anticipate, Your Highness?" Before Maria Valeria could respond, the train lurched violently, brakes screaming as it decelerated with alarming suddenness. The Archduchess was thrown forward, narrowly caught by Nadia before she could strike the opposite seat. "What on earth?" Maria Valeria began, but was interrupted as Lieutenant Keller burst through the compartment door. "Jurisdiction evolves with circumstances," Lieutenant Esterhazy said smoothly. "We seek only a single passenger and her possessions. Provide them, and the train continues to Vienna unhindered." All eyes turned to Nadia as understanding dawned. The Russian documents, somehow Esterhazy had learned of their significance. "This is outrageous," the Archduchess declared, stepping forward despite Keller's protective arm. "Miss Petrov is under my personal protection. Any action against her constitutes action against the imperial family itself. With respect, Your Imperial Highness, we have information that Miss Petrov carries materials vital to Hungarian national interests. Materials your own officials sought to remove from Budapest without proper consultation with Hungarian authorities, a violation of the Compromise of 1867. The standoff crackled with tension. Leibgarde officers awaited Keller's command, while Esterhazy's men kept weapons trained on the Imperial Party. "And if I refuse to surrender Miss Petrov?" the Archduchess asked coolly. "Then I fear this diplomatic incident becomes significantly more complicated," Esterhazy replied, his implication clear. Nadia stepped forward, decision crystallizing. "I'll go with them willingly," she announced. "There's no need for violence." "Nadia, no," Maria Valeria protested. "Please, Your Highness. My father's documents aren't worth bloodshed." Turning to Esterhazy, she added, "I require your word that the Archduchess and her party will continue safely to Vienna." "You have it," Esterhazy agreed, triumph evident in his expression. As Nadia gathered her traveling cloak, the Archduchess caught her arm, whispering urgently, "Captain Channing has contingencies in place. Vienna will respond. Stay alive until then." These cryptic words offered minimal comfort as Nadia was escorted from the train into the cold dawn. The last glimpse of the Archduchess's face showed concern mixed with something unexpected, calculation. Mounted on a horse between two guards, Nadia watched the imperial train resume its journey toward Vienna, carrying with it any immediate hope of rescue. As Esterhazy's company turned southeast, back toward Hungarian territory, she touched the hidden key beneath her dress. Whatever game was being played with empires and constitutions, Nadia had become a pawn moved by forces beyond her control. Yet Felix's parting words echoed in her memory, "Trust no one else." Somehow, she would find her way back to him and the promise their brief kiss had contained, if she could navigate the dangerous political currents now sweeping her away from everything familiar. Felix Channing paced the confines of room 317 in Buda Castle's west wing, anxiety growing with each passing hour. The small chamber, ordinarily assigned to visiting military attachés, had become his temporary command center since the Archduchess's sudden departure 2 days earlier. He checked his pocket watch again, nearly midnight. The imperial train should have reached Vienna yesterday morning, yet no confirmation had arrived through his established channels. More concerning was the complete silence regarding Nadia. His carefully placed informants in Budapest had reported nothing, as if the entire delegation had vanished into the winter air. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. He drew his service pistol before approaching the door. "Vienna sends greetings," came a muffled voice, the pre-arranged authentication phrase. Felix unlocked the door to admit Lieutenant Keller, whose travel-worn appearance and grim expression immediately heightened his concern. "Where is she?" Felix demanded without preamble. "Taken," Keller replied, removing his greatcoat. Hungarian nationalists stopped the train near the border. Led by Count Esterhazy himself. Felix's blood ran cold. The Archduchess continued to Vienna under guard. She insisted I return to Budapest with the news rather than remain with her party. Said you would understand the implications. And Nadia went willingly with these Hungarians. Keller nodded grimly. To prevent violence against the Archduchess. Esterhazy made it clear he wanted only her and whatever documents she carried. Felix slammed his fist against the desk, a rare display of emotion that revealed the depth of his concern. This makes no sense. Hungarian nationalists seizing a member of the imperial household staff? It's practically an act of war. unless they had reason to believe the emperor would disavow any connection rather than acknowledge what she carried. Keller hesitated. Felix, how much do you know about Miss Petrov's background? Enough, Felix replied tersely. Her father was involved with Russian constitutional reformists. He passed sensitive documents to her before his arrest and death. Documents that apparently contain more than just Russian political scandals. According to our intelligence, they include communications between Russian reformists and Hungarian nationalists dating back 20 years, evidence of a coordinated approach to constitutional demands that would compromise both empires. Felix absorbed this information, pieces falling into place. So Esterhazy believes these documents would strengthen Hungary's position in demanding further autonomy from Vienna. And Vienna would prefer such evidence remain buried, Keller confirmed. The emperor can't afford Hungarian separatist sentiments gaining momentum, especially with tensions already high throughout the empire. Where would Esterhazy take her? My best guess? His estate near Lake Balaton. It's defensible, remote, and his family has maintained a private militia there for generations. Felix moved to a map spread across the desk, his military training asserting itself. Distance from Budapest. Approximately 80 kilometers southwest. But Felix, you can't seriously be considering. I'm considering exactly what you imagine, Felix interrupted. The question is whether I go alone or with assistance. Keller studied him with a mixture of concern and resignation. The Archduchess anticipated your reaction. She provided this. He removed a sealed document from inside his uniform. Official orders authorizing you to recover sensitive materials vital to imperial security by any means necessary. Deliberately vague, but sufficient to requisition whatever you need. Felix broke the seal, confirming the Archduchess's signature and official stamp. She knew this would happen. She suspected it might. The entire Budapest visit was partly designed to flush out Hungarian agitators with designs on those documents. Miss Petrov was. Keller hesitated. Bait, Felix finished, anger hardening his voice. Used by her own protector. For what she believed was the greater good of the empire, Keller said, though his tone suggested personal reservations. The Archduchess calculated that Esterhazy would make his move eventually. Better on Habsburg terms than his. Felix studied the authorization, mind already formulating plans. I'll need 6 men, riding horses rather than a formal military transport. Civilian clothes over uniforms. We'll present as merchants if questioned. You realize that officially rescuing Miss Petrov is secondary to securing the documents, Keller said carefully. At least according to Vienna's priorities. Felix met his friend's gaze directly. Vienna's priorities are not necessarily mine. I suspected as much. Keller sighed. Your feelings for her are obvious to anyone with eyes, Felix. The question is whether you're prepared to place those feelings above your oath to the emperor. I took an oath to protect the empire and its people. Nadia Petrov is under imperial protection. I see no conflict. Then you're deliberately blind to it, Keller replied bluntly. If recovering those documents requires sacrificing Miss Petrov's safety, or worse, would you still fulfill your duty? The question hung between them, stark and uncompromising. Felix turned back to the map, unwilling to voice the answer forming in his heart, an answer that would constitute treason by any imperial standard. Have 6 men ready at dawn, he said instead. Make sure they understand the unofficial nature of this mission. Anyone with reservations should decline without prejudice. Keller nodded, recognizing both the evasion and the decision it implied. I'll lead them myself. Whatever happens at Esterhazy's estate, you shouldn't face it alone. As Keller departed to make preparations, Felix returned to the map, memorizing routes and terrain. His military mind calculated approaches, contingencies, and extraction paths with cold efficiency. Yet beneath this tactical planning, his thoughts returned repeatedly to Nadia, her intelligence, her courage, the brief moment of connection they had shared in a moonlit pavilion. Whatever forces had conspired to place her in danger, Felix silently vowed that Budapest would not be the end of their story. Even if it meant choosing her over the empire he had sworn to serve, he would find her. The realization should have troubled him more than it did, but as dawn approached, Felix felt only clarity and determination. Some choices transcended duty. Nadia maintained a neutral expression despite her surprise at this unexpected communication. "Thank you for the information," she replied carefully. "The tea smells wonderful." The maid straightened, her eyes conveying more than her words. "The lake freezes early this year. They say men can walk across to the southern shore by evening." With that cryptic statement, she departed, leaving Nadia to contemplate its meaning. Was this some kind of message? The Hungarian servants had seemed universally loyal to Esterházy, yet something in the maid's manner suggested otherwise. Approaching the window, Nadia studied the estate grounds with renewed attention. Guards patrolled at regular intervals, but their numbers did appear reduced compared to previous days. The lake stretched toward distant shores, its surface showing patches of ice near the banks though the center remained liquid. Movement at the estate's perimeter caught her eye, a small group of travelers approaching on horseback. From this distance they appeared to be ordinary merchants, perhaps selling winter provisions to the estate. Yet something in their formation struck Nadia as oddly disciplined for simple traders. Heart quickening with sudden hope, she searched for any sign of Felix among them, but they were still too distant to distinguish individual features. Could the maid's cryptic comments indicate a rescue attempt? Or was this mere coincidence feeding desperate wishful thinking? Regardless, Esterházy's absence presented the first potential opportunity for escape since her arrival. The question was whether to seize it immediately or wait for clearer signs of assistance. Decision crystallizing, Nadia began gathering what few possessions might prove useful: a small knife purloined from a dinner tray, extra stockings that could serve as makeshift gloves, a heavy traveling cloak. If escape became possible, hesitation might prove fatal. She had just concealed these items when heavy footsteps approached her door. Rather than the maid's gentle knock, this time a key turned in the lock before the door swung open. Count Esterházy stood there, his riding attire contradicting the maid's claim of his departure. "Good morning, Miss Petrov," he said, his courtesy now visibly strained. "I regret that circumstances require me to accelerate our timetable. Certain developments in Vienna suggest we may soon have uninvited guests." Nadia maintained her composure despite sinking hopes. "I'm not sure I understand, Count. Allow me to be perfectly clear, then." His voice hardened. "My sources in Vienna inform me that Captain Felix Channing departed Budapest yesterday with a small company of men. Their destination was not officially recorded, but their direction suggested Lake Balaton." At Felix's name, Nadia couldn't quite suppress a reaction. Esterházy noted it with grim satisfaction. "Ah, I see Captain Channing's involvement holds particular significance for you. How interesting. Perhaps more than professional concern motivates his unauthorized rescue mission." "Captain Channing serves the Emperor," Nadia replied evenly. "If he approaches, he does so under imperial orders." "Perhaps. Though my informants suggest his authorization comes from the Archduchess rather than Emperor Franz Joseph himself, a significant distinction in our complex political structure." Esterházy stepped further into the room. "Regardless, his arrival forces my hand. You will immediately produce the documents your father entrusted to you, or face consequences far less pleasant than the comfortable captivity you've enjoyed thus far. I've told you repeatedly, I don't have these mysterious documents. Then produce the cipher key I know you carry. My cryptographers will manage the rest once we recover the documents themselves." Nadia's hand instinctively moved toward her locket before she could stop the reaction. Esterházy's eyes tracked the movement, his expression darkening. "Bring her," he commanded to someone in the corridor. Two guards entered, taking positions on either side of Nadia. Outside her window, commotion erupted as armed men hurried into defensive positions. In the distance, the merchant party had stopped, apparently conferring among themselves. As the guards escorted her from the chamber, Nadia realized the fragile equilibrium had shattered. Whatever happened next would determine not only her fate but potentially the political future of the Austro-Hungarian Empire itself, with Felix caught directly in its turbulent center. Felix crouched behind a stone wall marking the estate's outer boundary, assessing the suddenly increased security with growing concern. Beside him, Keller observed the manor house through field glasses. "They know we're coming," Keller said grimly. "Defensive positions, double guards at all entrances. Someone in Budapest or Vienna betrayed our departure," Felix concluded. "Esterhazy has informants in both courts." The small company they had assembled, 6 former military men now dressed as traveling merchants, waited for instructions behind the cover of supply wagons. Their casual appearance had gotten them this close to the estate without immediate challenge, but the tactical advantage of surprise was clearly lost. "There she is," Keller said suddenly, adjusting his field glasses. "Eastern wing, 2nd floor. Being moved under guard." Felix took the glasses, heart clenching as he spotted Nadia between 2 armed men, being escorted down an exterior staircase toward what appeared to be a boathouse at the lake's edge. Even from this distance, her proud posture and unbroken bearing filled him with both admiration and fear for her safety. "They're taking her to the water. Possible transfer to another location," he said, military assessment temporarily overriding personal concern. "Or using the boathouse for interrogation away from household staff," Keller suggested darkly. Felix handed back the field glasses, decision made. "We move now. Standard Imperial formation, but remember we're technically not operating under full Imperial authority. Anyone who wishes to withdraw may do so without dishonor." Not a single man moved to leave. These were veterans of the Leibgarde, men who understood loyalty extended beyond formal structures to the bonds formed through service. "Armand and Joseph secure the main house," Felix continued, sketching a rough plan in the snow. "Keller, you and Tavish create a diversion at the northern perimeter. Make it look like a larger force. The rest of us approach the boathouse directly across the frozen section of lake. The ice may not hold all of us," one of the men cautioned. "Then we spread out. Move quickly but carefully." Felix checked his side-arm one final time. "Remember, our primary objective is extracting Miss Petrov safely. The documents are secondary despite what our official orders might imply." Keller gave him a significant look at this direct contradiction of imperial priorities, but nodded acceptance. "On your command, Captain." Felix gazed once more at the distant boathouse where Nadia had disappeared. Everything in his training demanded methodical planning, careful coordination, minimized risk. Yet every instinct told him that time was critically short. "Now," he ordered, abandoning caution for immediate action. The company separated according to plan, with Keller's team circling toward the northern edge of the estate while Felix led 3 men directly toward the lake. As they reached the shoreline, the ice creaked ominously beneath their weight. "Spread wider," Felix commanded, stepping carefully onto the frozen surface. "Keep moving but distribute the weight." They advanced slowly across the partially frozen lake, maintaining distance between them. From the estate came shouts of alarm as Keller's diversion took effect. Something was burning near the stables, drawing guards away from the boathouse. Halfway across the ice, a shot rang out. One of Felix's men dropped to a defensive crouch, returning fire toward a guard who had spotted their approach. The exchange alerted the entire estate to their presence, eliminating any remaining element of surprise. "Run!" Felix ordered, abandoning stealth for speed. The ice cracked beneath their accelerated movement, water seeping through fissures, but they pressed forward desperately. Reaching the shore near the boathouse, Felix signaled his men to take defensive positions while he approached the structure alone. Through small windows, he glimpsed movement inside, at least 3 figures, one seated. Drawing his pistol, Felix prepared to breach the door when it suddenly opened. Count Esterhazy himself emerged, dragging Nadia by the arm. A pistol in his other hand pressed against her side. "Captain Channing," Esterhazy called, his voice carrying across the frozen landscape. "What an unexpected pleasure. The Archduchess must value Miss Petrov tremendously to send her favorite guardsman on this unsanctioned rescue." Felix maintained 15 paces distance, his own weapon raised but position compromised by Nadia's proximity to his target. "Release her, Count. This situation can still resolve diplomatically." I think not. Diplomatic resolutions expired when armed men invaded my private estate. Esterhazy's arm tightened around Nadia, who remained eerily calm despite the pistol at her ribs. Here's my counter-proposal. Miss Petrov provides the cipher key she carries, and I have no intention of killing you, Felix replied coldly. But I am removing Miss Petrov from your custody, along with whatever she carries. The Empire dies while you play hero, Captain, Esterhazy spat. Those documents prove collusion between Russian reformists and Hungarian nationalists 20 years ago, communication authorized by Archduchess Maria Valeria herself. The accusation hung in the air like gunpowder smoke. Felix maintained his aim but couldn't fully hide his shock at this revelation. He's lying, Nadia said firmly. The Archduchess was barely more than a child 20 years ago. Old enough to sympathize with constitutional reform, Esterhazy countered. Old enough to secretly correspond with progressives in both empires, correspondence her father would view as treasonous if discovered. From the main house, more explosions and gunfire suggested Keller's diversion had escalated into open conflict. Time was running desperately short. We need to move, Felix told Nadia, backing them slowly toward the lakeshore where his men provided covering fire. This isn't over, Captain, Esterhazy called after them. Those documents will surface eventually. The old order cannot sustain itself forever. Reaching the frozen lake, Felix kept himself between Nadia and potential fire from the estate as they began their precarious journey back across the ice. Each step cracked the surface more severely than during their approach, the ice weakened by their earlier crossing. Stay spread out, Felix called to his men. Move carefully but quickly. Nadia clutched his arm as they navigated the treacherous surface. Felix, the things Esterhazy said about the Archduchess, later, he interrupted. First we reach safety. Gunfire erupted again from the shore as Esterhazy's remaining guards attempted to prevent their escape. Felix's men returned fire, creating covering suppression, but the exchange of bullets had a catastrophic effect on the already fragile ice. With a sickening crack, the surface beneath Felix and Nadia fractured. He had one moment to meet her eyes, one heartbeat to communicate everything he hadn't found words for, before the ice gave way completely, plunging them into the freezing waters of Lake Balaton. The shocking cold drove breath from lungs as they fought to surface in the shattered ice field. Felix's military greatcoat became a deadweight, threatening to drag him under, but his focus remained entirely on Nadia. Reaching her, he supported her head above water as they gasped for air amidst floating ice chunks. Swim for the shore, he commanded through chattering teeth, pointing toward their original approach point where his men continued providing covering fire. Together they struggled through the frigid water, pushing aside ice fragments, fighting the numbness rapidly overtaking extremities. Every movement became an act of pure will as cold sapped strength and clarity. When they finally reached solid ice near the original shoreline, neither could stand unassisted. Felix's men rushed forward, dragging them the final distance to land where Keller waited with horses. The others? Felix managed to ask as blankets were wrapped around his shuddering body. Regrouping at the rendezvous point, Keller replied, helping him onto a horse. Esterhazy's men are in disarray after the explosions. We have perhaps 15 minutes before they reorganize. Nadia was lifted onto the horse behind Felix, her arms weakly circling his waist for security. Her body trembled violently against his back, but her voice came with surprising strength. We need to reach Vienna, warned the Archduchess. As their small company galloped away from Esterhazy's estate, Felix felt Nadia's grip around his waist, cold hand seeking warmth, seeking connection, seeking assurance that their escape wasn't merely temporary reprieve before greater danger. Whatever political storm awaited them in Vienna, whatever truth lay in Esterhazy's accusations about the Archduchess, Felix knew with absolute certainty that he had made the right choice. Duty to empire might be compromised, but duty to conscience remained intact, as did his growing certainty that a life without Nadia Petrov had become unimaginable. Vienna's Hofburg Palace stood resplendent against a clear winter sky, its baroque facade revealing nothing of the political turmoil brewing within its walls. In a small antechamber near the Archduchess's private apartments, Nadia waited alone, still recovering from the harrowing journey from Hungary. For days had passed since their escape from Esterhazy's estate. For days of careful travel along back roads, avoiding main thoroughfares where Hungarian authorities might search for them. Felix had remained constantly at her side until their arrival in Vienna yesterday, when imperial protocol had reasserted itself with brutal efficiency, separating officer from charge, protector from protected, man from woman. The door opened, admitting not the Archduchess as expected but Emperor Franz Joseph himself. Nadia immediately sank into the deepest curtsy protocol demanded, heart racing at this unexpected imperial presence. "Rise, Miss Petrov," the Emperor said, his famous whiskers now fully white with age, his bearing still military precise despite his 70 years. "We have much to discuss and limited time for formalities." "Your Imperial Majesty honors me," Nadia murmured, rising but keeping her eyes respectfully lowered. "Honor has little relevance to our current situation," he replied bluntly. "Captain Channing has provided a full report of events at Leibgarde, including Count Esterhazy's accusations regarding my daughter." The Emperor's direct reference to such sensitive matters startled Nadia. Court protocol typically wrapped everything in layers of euphemism and indirection. "Esterhazy's claims were designed to create division, Your Majesty. I place no credence in them." Franz Joseph studied her with tired eyes that had witnessed the transformation of Europe across decades of rule. "And yet you carry documents that could potentially verify or disprove those claims. Documents your father entrusted to you before his arrest in St. Petersburg." "Yes, Your Majesty." "Where are these documents now?" Nadia hesitated, uncertain how to navigate this imperial interrogation. "They remain secure in a location known only to myself and Archduchess Maria Valeria." "And the cipher key Esterhazy sought?" The Emperor gestured toward the locket visible at Nadia's throat. Her hand moved instinctively to protect it. "It contains a cipher sequence, yes. Without it, the most sensitive portions of the correspondence remain unreadable." Franz Joseph nodded slowly, as if confirming something already known. "Captain Channing faces a military tribunal tomorrow morning. The charge is dereliction of duty, specifically, prioritizing your safety above the recovery of documents vital to imperial security." Nadia felt blood drain from her face. "That's unjust, Your Majesty." Captain Channing fulfilled his mission exactly as his heart dictated, rather than his orders, the Emperor interrupted. "His feelings for you are apparently obvious to everyone except perhaps yourselves. Under normal circumstances, such deviation from duty would merit severe consequences." The implication hung heavily in the still air of the antechamber. Felix might face not just disgrace but potential imprisonment, all for choosing her safety above political expediency. However, Franz Joseph continued, circumstances are far from normal. Captain Channing's actions, while technically insubordinate, may have inadvertently preserved imperial interests more effectively than strict adherence to orders would have accomplished. Confusion replaced Nadia's initial panic. "I don't understand, Your Majesty." "No, you don't. But my daughter does." The Emperor moved toward the door, opening it to admit Archduchess Maria Valeria. "I leave Miss Petrov to you, as agreed. Remember our conditions." With that cryptic statement, the Emperor departed, leaving Nadia alone with the Archduchess. "Your father seems troubled," Nadia ventured carefully after appropriate curtsying. "My father bears the weight of an empire that cannot continue in its present form," Maria Valeria replied with unexpected frankness. "He knows this, though he would never admit it publicly." She gestured for Nadia to sit, taking a chair opposite her. "Esterhazy's accusations contain elements of truth, though not in the form he imagines. 20 years ago, I did indeed correspond with constitutional reformists, not from revolutionary zeal, but from recognition that adaptation might prevent collapse. The documents my father protected include some of that correspondence, yes. Your father was entrusted with communications between progressive elements in both empires, communications that envisioned constitutional monarchy as an alternative to either rigid autocracy or chaotic revolution." Nadia struggled to absorb these revelations. "Then why did you allow me to be placed in danger at Esterhazy's hands? Why use me as bait?" Maria Valeria's expression softened with genuine regret. Because Esterhazy and his faction represent a dangerous third path, nationalist separation that would tear the empire apart along ethnic lines. I needed to confirm his involvement and methods before acting against him. At my expense, Nadia said, unable to keep bitterness from her voice. Yes. For which? The documents are concealed behind the false panel in the music room bookcase, the shelf containing romantic composers. The mechanism releases when Mozart's Symphony No. 40 is played. Maria Valeria accepted both locket and information with a nod of acknowledgement. You've served the empire well, Nadia, better perhaps than those of us born to its service. What happens now? Now you face another choice. The Archduchess rose, moving to retrieve a document from a nearby cabinet. Captain Channing has submitted his resignation from the Leibgarde, effective following tomorrow's tribunal. He intends to return to England, where his father's reputation has been posthumously rehabilitated. She handed Nadia the document, a steamship passage to London dated 3 days hence. The question is whether he travels alone. Nadia stared at the ticket, its implications overwhelming. You would allow me to leave your service? After everything? Allow? My dear, I practically insist. A genuine smile softened the Archduchess's features. Some dedicate their lives to preserving empires. Others deserve the chance to build something more personal, more immediate, something with foundations stronger than political convenience. I don't know what to say. Say nothing to me. Save your words for Captain Channing. I believe he'll have questions requiring answers only you can provide. As Nadia left the antechamber, steamship ticket carefully secured in her pocket, the weight of recent events began to lift. The political intrigue, the documents, the competing imperial interests, all receded before the prospect of a future defined not by duty to fading empires but by commitment to a single, vital connection. Tomorrow would bring Felix's tribunal and its apparently predetermined outcome. Beyond that stretched possibility unmarked by palace walls and court protocol, possibility she had never dared imagine during her years of careful survival within imperial constraints. Whether that possibility led to England or elsewhere mattered less than the profound realization that for the first time since her father's death, true choice lay before her, and the person with whom she most wished to share that choice waited somewhere within Vienna's labyrinthine power structures, perhaps harboring similar hopes. The Imperial Military Tribunal convened in a wood-paneled chamber within the Hofburg's administrative wing. Felix stood at attention in full dress uniform, the gold braid and medals a stark contrast to the severity of the proceedings. Before him sat 3 senior officers of the Leibgarde, their expressions professionally impassive as they reviewed the charges. Captain Felix Channing, intoned the presiding officer, you stand accused of deviating from explicit orders during the Lake Balaton operation. Specifically, prioritizing the extraction of a civilian over the recovery of documents deemed critical to imperial security. How do you plead? Guilty with explanation, sir, Felix replied clearly. Proceed with your explanation. Felix had rehearsed this moment repeatedly, knowing his future, and possibly Nadia's, depended on navigating this final official hurdle. My orders from the Archduchess Maria Valeria directed me to recover sensitive materials vital to imperial security by any means necessary. In my judgment, the immediate physical safety of Miss Petrov constituted the most urgent aspect of imperial security, as she carried the only cipher key capable of rendering the documents intelligible. A half-truth at best. His decision had been made from the heart rather than tactical assessment, but the justification was technically defensible. The tribunal members exchanged glances, conveying unspoken communication. Captain Channing, your service record reflects exemplary dedication to duty across 12 years, the presiding officer noted. This deviation represents an anomaly that requires examination. Yes, sir. Lieutenant Keller's testimony indicates that Count Esterhazy specifically targeted Miss Petrov rather than the physical documents, suggesting her personal knowledge represented the greater strategic value. Would you concur with this assessment? I would, sir. The officer studied a document before him. Felix recognized the Archduchess's seal upon it. The Archduchess has submitted a statement confirming that Miss Petrov has now transferred both the cipher key and the location of the documents to imperial authorities, rendering the original material secure. In light of this development, the operational outcome must be considered successful despite methodological concerns. Felix maintained rigid posture, not daring to reveal the surge of relief at confirmation that Nadia had surrendered the documents. Her safety was now assured, regardless of his own fate. After several minutes of murmured consultation among the tribunal members, the presiding officer addressed him again. "Captain Channing, this tribunal finds that while your actions deviated from conventional interpretation of orders, the ultimate objective was achieved through alternate methodology. Your resignation from the Leibgarde, submitted yesterday, is accepted without prejudice to your record of service." The verdict, clearly predetermined, as Felix had suspected, represented neither vindication nor condemnation. It simply facilitated his departure from imperial service with honor intact, while avoiding establishing any precedent that might encourage similar independent judgment from other officers. "The Emperor extends his personal appreciation for your years of loyal service," the officer added, his formal tone softening slightly. "You are dismissed from imperial duty, effective immediately." Felix saluted crisply, turned on his heel, and exited the chamber. In the corridor outside, Lieutenant Keller waited, offering a comradely handshake. "A reasonable conclusion to an unreasonable situation," Keller commented. "England will welcome back a native son with your qualifications." "If England is indeed my destination," Felix replied, removing his dress gloves with a sense of finality. Keller studied him knowingly. "Ah. So it's like that, is it? I suspected as much when I saw the dual passage booking." "What booking?" "For the Southampton steamer. 2 passages were reserved yesterday in your name." Keller smiled at Felix's obvious confusion. "You didn't make such arrangements." "No," Felix admitted, hope rising despite his attempt at caution. "Perhaps the Archduchess has a romantic streak well concealed beneath Habsburg protocol," Keller finished. "Speaking of which, I believe someone awaits you in the palace gardens. Eastern section, near the Greek statuary." With a final congratulatory clasp of shoulders, Keller departed, leaving Felix to navigate the palace corridors one final time, no longer as captain of the Leibgarde but as a private citizen, free from the obligations and constraints of imperial service. The eastern gardens lay quiet under winter sunshine, their formal pattern softened by a light dusting of snow. Near a statue of Athena, Nadia stood alone, her dark cloak vivid against the white landscape. She turned at his approach, her expression a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "I surrendered the documents and cipher key," she said without preamble. "The Archduchess indicated it would ensure favorable outcome for your tribunal." "So I was informed," Felix replied, closing the distance between them. "Though I would have accepted whatever consequences came, knowing you were safe." "And now? What consequences come from freedom?" Her question contained layers of meaning, inquiry about his plans, their future, possibilities neither had dared voice directly. Felix reached for her hands, protocol and propriety no longer relevant to their situation. "I submitted my resignation before the tribunal convened. My father's family in England has offered position, should I choose to return." "England," Nadia repeated softly. "I've never seen it, though I studied its literature and history. Perhaps you might explore it firsthand." Felix produced the steamship ticket Keller had mentioned. "Apparently passage has been arranged. The question is whether you would consider accompanying me." Nadia's smile bloomed slowly, transforming her entire countenance. From her pocket she withdrew an identical ticket. "The Archduchess suggested I might find the climate agreeable." Joy swept through Felix like sunlight breaking through clouds. "She seems determined to manage our affairs even as we depart her service. I suspect she envisions a different life than duty permitted her," Nadia said thoughtfully. "Perhaps arranging our opportunity provides vicarious satisfaction. Whatever her motives, I cannot regret the outcome." Felix drew Nadia closer, propriety finally yielding completely to genuine feeling. "Though I regret the dangers you faced because of me." "Because of you, I survived those dangers," she corrected gently. and discovered something worth more than safety. The palace and the city of Vienna spread before them, magnificent, historic, the center of an empire whose foundations had begun to shift. Yet in that moment, neither Felix nor Nadia looked back at the world they were leaving. Their gaze remained fixed on each other, and beyond, to possibilities unconstrained by imperial politics and rigid hierarchies. 3 days until departure, Felix noted. Enough time to settle affairs and pack suitable belongings for English weather.